Somewhere over the Eastern Front, a Russian pilot flying one of Moscow's most expensive fighter jets never saw it coming. On July 8, 2026, Ukraine's Air Force posted a single line on Telegram that sent shockwaves through military circles from Kiev to Washington. Confirmed. A Russian Su-35 multi-role fighter has been shot down in the eastern direction. 6 words. That's all it took to announce the destruction of one of the most advanced combat aircraft Russia has ever built. No fanfare, no parade, just a quiet, brutal confirmation that Russia's sky is no longer Russia's alone. And here's what almost nobody outside defense circles understands yet. This is not just another aircraft loss. This is a jet that Russia cannot easily replace, flown by a pilot experienced enough to be dropping glide bombs on Ukrainian cities from the safety of what Moscow believed was untouchable airspace. Until it wasn't. Today, we're going to break down exactly what happened, why this specific jet matters more than almost any other loss this year, and why Russia's own military bloggers are quietly admitting something that Kremlin television will never say out loud. Stay until the end, because the story behind this single shootdown connects directly to a much bigger crisis unfolding inside Russia's Air Force, one that Vladimir Putin cannot fix no matter how much money he throws at it. Let's start with why this aircraft matters so much. The Su-35, known to NATO as the Flanker E, is not some outdated Soviet leftover being thrown at the front line out of desperation. This is a 4++ generation multi-role fighter, the most advanced aircraft Russia has in regular combat service. It is built on the bones of the legendary Su-27, but modernized with thrust vectoring engines that give it a level of maneuverability few aircraft on Earth can match. It can push past Mach 2. It can escort strike packages. It can hunt other fighters in the air. And most dangerously for Ukraine, it can launch guided glide bombs from deep inside Russian-controlled territory, hitting Ukrainian frontline positions and cities from a distance where Ukraine's older air defenses simply could not reach back. For years, that was the terrifying part of this aircraft. It let Russian pilots kill from a safe distance. The single event just proved that safe distance is shrinking. So what actually happened on July 8th? According to Ukraine's Air Force, a Russian Su-35 was shot down in the eastern direction. That phrase, eastern direction, is deliberately vague. Ukrainian officials rarely disclose exact coordinates, unit numbers, or specific weapon systems used in a shootdown, and for good reason. Announcing precisely how an aircraft was destroyed would hand Russian pilots a roadmap for avoiding the same mistake twice. What we do know is this. Ukraine's Air Force released the confirmation on their official channel, calling it, in their words, another Russian air terrorist eliminated. It's blunt language, but it reflects how Ukrainian forces frame every Su-35, every Su-34, every glide bomb carrier that Russia sends towards civilian areas. Independent outlets covering the war, including Kiev Post, United 24 Media, and RBC Ukraine, all confirmed the Ukrainian Air Force's statement within hours. And here's an important detail for accuracy. As of this recording, no independent satellite imagery or wreckage footage has been published to visually confirm the kill. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. Ukrainian Air Force shoot-down claims throughout this war have an extremely high confirmation rate once imagery does surface. But right now, this is an official Ukrainian military claim, not yet an independently verified visual kill. We'll flag it, honestly, because that's what separates real reporting from wartime hype. And here's where the story gets stranger. It wasn't just Ukraine confirming this. A Russian military blogger, running a Telegram channel called Voyevoda Broadcasts, also acknowledged the loss of the Su-35. According to this Russian source, the pilot ejected and survived, making it back to Russian lines. Think about what that means. A pro-Russian military channel, the kind of source that typically downplays Ukrainian successes, independently corroborated that Russia lost one of its most valuable fighter jets. When the people cheering for the other side confirm your kill. That's about as close to verification as war reporting gets without satellite footage. On the Ukrainian side, a Telegram channel associated with the Air Force, known as Sunflower, added a chilling detail. According to their post, the pilot who was shot down was described as an experienced enemy aviator who had been, in their words, causing significant trouble in that sector for some time. In other words, this wasn't a rookie pilot on his first combat sortie. Ukraine may have just removed a skilled veteran aviator from Russia's already thinning roster of Su-35 pilots. And in a war of attrition, experienced pilots are almost as hard to replace as the jets themselves. Now let's talk about why Russia cannot simply shrug this off and build another one. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion back in February 2022, it entered the war with roughly 100 Su-35 fighters in its inventory. That might sound like a lot, but the Su-35 is not mass-produced like a drone or an artillery shell. It is a precision-engineered, multi-million-dollar aircraft that takes specialized factories, rare components, and skilled labor to assemble. By December 2025, according to open source tracking, Russia had already lost at least 8 Su-35s over more than 3 years of fighting. If this latest shootdown is fully confirmed, that would make it at least the 9th confirmed loss of the war. 9 sounds like a small number until you look at how slowly Russia can replace them. According to research from the UK-based Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, Russian factories ordered 12 new Su-35s in 2024 and delivered only 10. Sanctions on precision components, disruptions to the supply chain, and constraints on skilled labor have all slowed Russia's ability to simply print new fighter jets the way it prints new infantry conscripts. Every Su-35 lost in this war is a jet that takes months, sometimes longer, to even partially replace. And Russia doesn't just need the airframe. It needs a fully trained pilot to fly it, someone experienced enough to survive contested airspace, which brings us right back to the veteran pilot detail Ukraine highlighted. The shootdown didn't happen in isolation either. It's part of a much bigger pattern that's been accelerating for weeks. Just 2 days before this Su-35 went down, on July 4th, Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, known as HUAR, confirmed that a Russian MiG-29 fighter had been destroyed on the ground at Belbek Airfield in occupied Crimea, following a June 26th strike. HUAR estimated the financial damage from that single strike at tens of millions of dollars. Around the same period, Ukrainian drones reportedly damaged at least 7 additional Russian warplanes at Saki Air Base, also in occupied Crimea, according to Ukraine's security service. These aren't isolated pinpricks. This is a coordinated campaign targeting Russian combat aircraft, both in the air and on the ground, hitting Russia's aviation capability from multiple directions at once. And it's not a one-sided story either, which matters for accuracy. Ukraine has also taken losses in the same window. On June 27th, Ukraine lost 3 of its own MiG-29 fighters, with 1 shot down in the air and 2 destroyed on the ground at Voznesensk airfield. War in the air is brutal, and it cuts both ways. But the trend line for Russia's most advanced aircraft, the Su-35 specifically, is one of steady, grinding attrition that Moscow's factories simply cannot keep pace with. There's also a financial angle here that Russian state television will never explain to its own population. Ukraine has been deliberately targeting the supply chain that keeps Russian aircraft flying, not just the aircraft themselves. In 2025, Ukrainian-made Flamingo cruise missiles struck the Skif M facility in Belgorod, a site linked to Russia's military-industrial supply network. Satellite imagery confirmed all 4 missiles hit their intended targets. This is the quieter, less flashy side of Ukraine's aviation strategy. It's not just about winning individual dogfights. It's about slowly strangling the infrastructure that lets Russia rebuild what it loses in the sky. Every hit on a production facility, every strike on a parked aircraft at an airbase, every downed Su-35 adds up to the same conclusion. Russia's Air Force is being worn down faster than it can regenerate, and its own factories are quietly confirming it through their own delivery numbers. Now, here's where things get genuinely interesting for the direction of this war. Ukraine isn't just playing defense in the sky anymore. It's preparing to fundamentally change the math of its air campaign. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking at the NATO Defense Industry Forum in Ankara on July 7th, just 1 day before this Su-35 was shot down, told allies that current Patriot missile production is not sufficient to meet the growing demand for protection against Russian ballistic missiles. Standing beside Zelensky in Ankara, Donald Trump reportedly gave Ukraine a green light to begin producing Patriot missile components domestically under license, according to reporting from the Kyiv Independent. That's a significant shift. Instead of waiting on limited Allied shipments, Ukraine may soon be able to build critical air defense components on its own soil. On top of that, Ukraine is preparing to receive Swedish-built Gripen fighter jets, armed with Meteor air-to-air missiles, a weapon system with significantly longer range than anything Ukrainian pilots currently have in their arsenal. According to Ukrainian military aviation expert Andrei Karuk, speaking to the Kyiv Independent, that extended range could force Russian pilots to drop their glide bombs from much farther behind the front line, which would shrink how far those bombs can actually reach Ukrainian territory. In other words, even without shooting down a single additional jet, the mere presence of longer-range Ukrainian missiles could push Russian aircraft further back, reducing the damage they can inflict. But let's be clear about where this war actually stands, because overselling a single shootdown does a disservice to the real picture. Ukraine's former commander-in-chief, now serving as ambassador to the UK, Valery Zaluzhny, offered a sobering warning around this same period. He cautioned against assuming Russia has, in his words, effectively lost the war, arguing that neither side's deep strike campaigns, whether it's Ukraine hitting Russian air bases or Russia hitting Ukrainian cities, can deliver a single decisive knockout blow. This remains, in his assessment, a grinding war of attrition. That's an important reality check. One Su-35 going down doesn't end a war, but it does chip away, sortie by sortie, jet by jet, pilot by pilot, at Russia's ability to sustain the kind of air campaign it launched back in 2022. And attrition wars are won not by single dramatic moments, but by which side can keep replacing its losses longer than the other. Right now, the numbers suggest Russia's aviation industry is losing that race. Let's zoom out for a second and look at the total picture of Russian air losses. According to Ukraine's general staff, as of this Su-35 shootdown, Russia has lost 436 aircraft and 353 helicopters since the start of the full-scale invasion. Those are cumulative figures across more than 4 years of war, and they include everything from cheap Cold War-era attack helicopters to some of Russia's most advanced fighters. The Su-35, specifically, sits near the top of that hierarchy of losses in terms of value and capability. This isn't a war being fought only with drones and artillery anymore, even though those remain the dominant killers on the battlefield. It's also a slow, expensive war of attrition happening in the skies, one where Russia keeps sending its most capable aircraft toward the front to support glide bomb strikes, and one where Ukraine keeps finding new ways, whether through Western-supplied Patriot batteries, F-16s, or homegrown missile systems, to reach up and pull them out of the sky. And this brings us to the human side of the story, the part that state propaganda on both sides tends to flatten into pure statistics. A Su-35 pilot, experienced enough to have been flagged by Ukrainian forces as someone who had caused significant trouble in his sector, is not a random name on a casualty list. That's a highly trained aviator, likely with hundreds of flight hours. Someone Russia invested years of training and enormous resources into. According to the Russian side's own reporting, the pilot ejected and survived. So this isn't a story about a death. It's a story about an aircraft removed from the fight, and a skilled pilot who now has to sit on the ground while Russia tries to figure out how to replace both the jet and the experience that pilot brought with him. War in the air rarely produces the kind of tidy, singular villain versus hero narrative you see in movies. What it actually produces is a slow, grinding math problem. How many jets can you build? How many pilots can you train? How long can your factories keep pace with your losses? Right now, every piece of open source evidence, from RUSI's production tracking to Ukraine's own general staff numbers, points to Russia losing that math problem. So what happens next? If the Su-35 shootdown is fully corroborated with imagery in the coming days, which is the typical pattern for Ukrainian Air Force claims throughout this war, it will mark at least the 9th confirmed Su-35 loss since 2022, out of a starting fleet of roughly 100 aircraft. That's nearly 10% of Russia's most advanced fighter fleet gone, in a country that can only manage to deliver around 10 new units a year, even when everything in its supply chain goes right. Meanwhile, Ukraine is expanding its own toolkit. Longer-range Meteor missiles on incoming Gripen jets, domestically produced Patriot components, a continued campaign against Russian aircraft manufacturing and repair infrastructure. None of this guarantees a fast end to the war. As Zaluzhny warned, this remains a grinding attritional fight where neither side has landed a knockout blow. But it does mean that every time a Russian Su-35 takes off from a base like Borisogledsk, where 7 of these jets were reportedly parked just hours before a Ukrainian drone strike hit the airfield, Russian commanders now have to factor in a level of risk that simply didn't exist in the early days of this war, when Russian air superiority was assumed rather than contested. Now let's widen the lens even further, because this Su-35 shootdown did not happen in a quiet week. It happened during one of the most intense stretches of this entire war, and understanding that context tells you exactly why Russia's Air Force is stretched as thin as it currently is. Just days before this jet went down, Russia launched a massive night assault on Kyiv, sending nearly 500 drones and 77 missiles at the capital in a single wave. That attack killed at least 30 people and injured dozens more, according to Ukrainian officials, with fires breaking out across the city and residential buildings damaged. Timer Tikachenko, head of Kyiv's military administration, confirmed a woman was killed and 2 others injured in a follow-up strike just a day later, as ballistic missiles and drones once again rocked the capital. This is the environment Russia's Su-35 fleet operates inside. It's not flying occasional patrol missions in a quiet theater. It's flying constant support and escort missions for one of the most relentless missile and drone campaigns of the entire war. Every sortie adds wear, risk, and exposure, and every sortie is another chance for Ukrainian air defense to catch an expensive mistake. At the same time, Ukraine has been striking back far beyond its own borders. According to Ukrainian military commander Robert Brovdy, known by his call sign Meteor, Ukrainian forces hit 21 vessels over a 72-hour period in the Azov Sea and around Crimea's Kerch port, including 19 so-called Shadow Fleet tankers, vessels Russia uses to quietly move sanctioned oil around the world. This matters for the Su-35 story too, because it's part of the same broader strategy. Ukraine isn't just trying to win individual dogfights in the sky. It's trying to squeeze every part of the machine that keeps Russia's war economy and war machine running, from the oil tankers funding the Kremlin's budget to the factories building replacement fighter jets. It's a war being fought simultaneously in the air, at sea, and deep inside supply chains that most people never see on the news. There's also a diplomatic layer unfolding at exactly the same time. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte announced that the alliance's next summit will be held in Albania, though an exact date has not yet been set. At the Ankara Forum, where Zelensky raised concerns about Patriot production, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan voiced support for a Trump-led peace initiative regarding Ukraine and announced additional military support. Meanwhile, NATO and EU officials confirmed a combined aid pledge worth roughly 70 billion euros for Ukraine, though much of that figure was drawn from previously existing commitments rather than entirely new funding. And in a smaller but symbolically significant move, the Czech government, which had campaigned domestically against arming Kyiv, reversed course and agreed to purchase American weapons, specifically to send to Ukraine. None of these individual headlines are as dramatic as a fighter jet exploding out of the sky. But together, they paint the picture of a war that is being fought on every front at once. Military, economic, and diplomatic, with the fate of aircraft like this Su-35 sitting right at the intersection of all three. It's also worth understanding how Ukraine is adapting its ground war in ways that free up resources for exactly this kind of high-end air campaign. Ukrainian forces have reportedly struck more than 1,000 Russian armored vehicles and artillery systems as part of an operation using combat robots, with new unmanned ground systems being fielded at a rapid pace. Ukraine's Brave Defense Innovation Unit has also opened grant competitions for humanoid robotics and is developing new mobile platforms like air mobile buggies to move troops more efficiently near the front line. Why does this matter for a story about a single downed fighter jet? Because modern warfare doesn't happen in silos. Every rifle, drone, robot, and missile system Ukraine automates or improves on the ground reduces the manpower and resources it needs to dedicate there, freeing up more attention, more funding, and more Western political capital to pour into exactly the kind of high-value air defense and long-range missile systems that are now hunting Russia's best fighter jets out of the sky. This isn't even the first time Ukraine has managed to pull off a Su-35 kill using advanced Western hardware. Rewind to June 7, 2025, roughly 13 months before this latest shootdown. On that day, a Ukrainian F-16 Viper reportedly shot down a Russian Su-35 over Russia's own Kursk Oblast using a long-range AMRAAM missile, marking what was, at the time, the first confirmed air-to-air kill by a Ukrainian-operated F-16 in this war. Drone footage circulating afterward appeared to show a burning wreck on the ground inside Russian territory. Some analysts speculated that Ukraine's Saab 340 airborne early warning aircraft may have helped vector the F-16 into position, though that detail was never fully confirmed. What matters here is the pattern. This latest Su-35 loss isn't an isolated fluke. It's part of a growing track record of Ukraine successfully hunting down Russia's most capable fighter using increasingly sophisticated Western-supplied tools, first with F-16s and American missiles, and now potentially expanding into Gripen jets, carrying even longer-range Meteor missiles. Each new platform Ukraine receives adds another tool capable of reaching a Su-35 before that Su-35 can reach a Ukrainian city. It's worth pausing here to compare what Russia is losing against what it's actually able to put in the air as a replacement. The Su-35 was originally developed as an export-friendly evolution of the Su-27, and a portion of Russia's production capacity has reportedly been earmarked for foreign buyers as well, not just its own air force. Leaked Russian military-industrial correspondence from late 2025 reportedly indicated that as many as 16 Su-35s were already in production, specifically for Iran at the time, meaning even the limited number of new jets rolling off Russian assembly lines aren't all going to reinforce Moscow's own dwindling squadrons over Ukraine. Every jet earmarked for export is one less jet available to replace what's being lost at the front. That's not speculation, that's simple arithmetic, and it's part of why Western defense researchers tracking Russia's production numbers keep landing on the same conclusion. Russia's high-end fighter fleet is shrinking faster than its factories can rebuild it, and outside commitments are only making that math worse. There's a psychological dimension to this too, one that rarely makes it into official statements, but shows up constantly in the tone of Russian military bloggers. When a pro-Russian Telegram channel voluntarily confirms the loss of one of the country's most advanced aircraft instead of staying silent or denying it, that tells you something about how normalized these losses have become inside Russia's own military community. In the early years of the war, Russian state media worked hard to suppress or downplay aircraft losses. Now, channels like Voivoda broadcasts are matter-of-factly confirming shoot-downs almost in real time, often faster than official Russian Ministry of Defense statements. That shift reflects a war that has dragged on so long and produced so many losses that even sympathetic voices inside Russia's own information ecosystem have largely given up trying to hide the scale of it. The story isn't just being told by Kyiv anymore, it's being confirmed, reluctantly, from inside Russia itself. So what should you actually take away from all of this? Not that Russia's Air Force is finished, because it isn't, and pretending otherwise would be exactly the kind of exaggerated, unverified claim that gets channels in trouble and misleads audiences. Russia still operates hundreds of combat aircraft and continues launching daily strikes against Ukrainian territory. But the specific story of this one Su-35, shot down on July 8, 2026, confirmed by Ukraine's Air Force and corroborated by a Russian military blogger, sits at the center of a much larger, well-documented trend. A shrinking fleet of Russia's most capable fighters, a production line that consistently underdelivers against its own targets, a veteran pilot pulled out of the fight, and a Ukrainian air campaign that keeps expanding its reach, from F-16s wielding AMRAAMs over Russian territory last year, to Patriot batteries defending Kyiv's skies today, to Gripen jets with Meteor missiles arriving soon. Put all of that together, and a single 6-word Telegram post starts to look less like an isolated headline and more like one more data point in a slow, grinding, but very real shift in who controls the skies over this war. Let's also address something a lot of viewers ask in the comments every time we cover an aircraft shootdown. Why does Ukraine so rarely release footage immediately, and why should you trust a claim before that footage exists? The honest answer is that Ukrainian Air Force shootdown claims have built up a fairly strong track record of eventually being confirmed by satellite imagery, wreckage photos, or corroborating statements from the Russian side itself, exactly like what happened here with the Voivoda Broadcasts channel. But strong track record is not the same as guaranteed. Throughout this war, there have been instances where initial claims were later revised, where an aircraft type was misidentified in the first hours of reporting, or where casualty and cost figures shifted once more sources weighed in. That's exactly why, earlier in this video, we made a point of using the verified cost range for the Su-35, which sits between $75 and $85 million depending on configuration and export terms, rather than repeating rounder, less accurate figures that circulate on social media in the first few hours after a shootdown. It's also why we flagged that independent imagery hadn't surfaced yet at the time of this recording. If you're watching this later and full confirmation has since been published, that's the system working exactly as it should. Slow, layered verification beats fast, unverified hype every time, especially when we're talking about a war where misinformation gets weaponized by both sides constantly. It's also worth thinking about the next few weeks, because this story is unlikely to be the last of its kind. With Ukraine's Gripen fleet expected to begin integrating Meteor missiles, with domestic Patriot component production potentially coming online following the framework discussed in Ankara, and with Russia continuing to fly Su-35s in support of near-daily glide bomb and missile strikes, the conditions that produce this shootdown are not going away anytime soon. If anything, they're intensifying. Watch for whether Russia adjusts its Su-35 flight patterns in response to this loss, perhaps flying missions further from the contact line, or relying more heavily on cheaper, more expendable Su-34s and Su-30s to absorb risk instead. That kind of tactical shift would itself be a quiet admission that Moscow can no longer afford to risk its top-tier fighters the way it did in the earlier years of this war. And watch for whether more Russian military bloggers, not just Voivoda broadcasts, start openly acknowledging losses that the Kremlin's official channels would rather keep quiet. That shift in tone, from denial to reluctant confirmation, may end up telling us more about the true state of Russia's Air Force than any single shootdown ever could. Let's go back to where we started. A single Telegram post, 6 words. Confirmed. A Russian Su-35 shot down in the eastern direction. Behind those 6 words sits a much bigger story. A fighter jet worth tens of millions of dollars that Russia cannot quickly replace, a veteran pilot pulled out of the fight, according to Russia's own military bloggers, a production line delivering fewer jets than it promises, and a Ukrainian air campaign that is no longer just defending its skies, but actively hunting the aircraft that Russia once believed were untouchable. Vladimir Putin can call his pilots heroes on state television all he wants. He can announce new production numbers that never quite materialize. But out on the Eastern Front, in the cockpits of the pilots who actually have to fly these missions, the calculation has changed. The sky over Ukraine is no longer a safe place for even Russia's best aircraft. And every time one more Su-35 goes down, that message gets a little louder, whether the Kremlin wants to admit it or not. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure to like the video and drop a comment letting us know what part of this story surprised you most, whether it's the production numbers, the pilot survival detail, or the bigger picture of Russia's shrinking Su-35 fleet. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of how this war in the skies keeps evolving, because this story is far from over,